Well, welcome to World Religions course again. We are now shifting from the study of Buddhism and moving into a study of secular humanism, which in some circles is considered a religion. Others would argue no, and we'll be talking about that to some degree here as well. But because secular humanism is a worldview, we include it in this series to look at its influence and its teachings in contrast to Christian teachings. So that will contrast the secular worldview, secular humanism worldview with the biblical worldview. So let me share the screen with you and we will get started. All right. Well, among the world religions, some people would class secular humanism as one of the religions, but we'll talk about the problem with calling it a religion in a little bit. But you can see down here some icons. The atomic symbol with the A in the middle is actually a symbol for atheism. Here, the happy man, he is humanism. Here an A with this design, atheism. Over here, this is secular humanism. You can see religious thought is being trashed over here and put in the trash bin. But for us as Christians, of course, we want to follow Christ's example of service and to not only one another, but to the world, which Christ epitomized. And in that way, we're very humanistic in the sense that we really do believe, as God has said, that all people are created in the image of God, and therefore they're of equal worth and value in God's sight, and thus should be for us. So, as we move into this, we'll be discussing humanism from various perspectives that will eventually give rise to secular humanism. And we'll be discussing those as we go along. But this first part of this will be laying some historical foundation, and we'll be doing that for the first couple of parts anyway. All right, is secular humanism a worldview or a religion or a religious worldview? And there's no doubt about it, it's a worldview. That is for sure. But is it a religious worldview? Well, secular humanists disagree on whether to say it's a religious worldview based on a broad definition of religion. Some evangelical Christian leaders argue it is a religion. I sometimes think they're arguing it more from a point that if it gets classed as a religion, then it doesn't have access to classrooms, just like law is excluding the teaching of Christianity in the classroom. But is that the criteria we use to decide whether that we should call it a religious worldview would be the question. Corliss Lamont, this fellow here that you see, he sometimes I've seen him referred to as the father of modern secularism, but I don't know that that is a actual official designation like others have been officially identified that way. But he certainly was a spokesman for it and wrote a lot for it and spoke a lot in favor of it. So it could very well be. But humanism was philosophy, he would say, not a religion. Humanism contends that instead of the gods creating the cosmos in the individualized form of human beings, giving rein to their imagination, created the gods. So, like we said at the beginning of this course, how source of religion, well, he would say the source of religion are humans from their own imaginations and mind for whatever reason. That was the psychological approach that we talked about, or subjective approach, and then the evolutionary approach. So he would go with that, but he does not call it a religious worldview. Paul Kurtz, another big spokesman for secular humanism, takes the position that secular humanism is just a philosophy built on reason and science, which does not allow for any supernatural or, quote, transnatural reality. And so, but among the exponents of secular humanism, there are those that do lean towards, calling it a religious worldview as well, along with other main religions. In fact, you've got the Supreme Court that weighed in on it with Turcaso v. Watkins, or they ruled that secular humanism could be recognized as a religion and therefore had the protections of religion as well. And they ruled like this is a quote from them: among religions in this country which do not teach what would generally be considered a belief in the existence of God are Buddhism, Taoism, ethical culture, secular humanism, and others. All right. Well, I don't, at least the way we define religion in this course, that's not the case. But if we just take what they're saying, first of all, in Theravada Buddhism, which is the one they're talking about, Mahayana Buddhism definitely has God or gods. But Theravada Buddhism doesn't have God in the sense of a monotheistic thinking and a personal being, but at the same time, it has some ultimate that is beyond the physical realm type of existence, in the sense of you're trying to get released and you achieve this release. But Taoism does have metaphysical aspects to it, and in fact, a lot of Taoism has gods or God in it. So for our purposes, we're going to disagree with Turcaso v. Watkins, because our definition of it does not include secular humanism. So worldview and religion are terms that are closely related, but they're not synonymous. Every religion can be called a worldview. However, not all worldviews are religious, depending on how you define religion. For example, the main world religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam are worldviews and religions. But while secular humanism is not a religion, it is a worldview. And this, for our purposes in this class, we adopted the following reminder of what we talked about earlier videos. A religion is a system of beliefs, rituals, and practices by followers that provide values to give life meaning and coherence by directing the followers toward transcendence. Now that toward transcendence, that's why Buddhism can be God. There is a transcendence they're seeking, but they're not like the personal God. So that transcendence does not exist in secular humanism, and therefore we won't class it among religions, but we will class it as a worldview. And since this is a course on world religions and worldviews, we're going to look at secular humanism, probably because it is one of the faster growing areas of thought, and a worldview that's probably, out of all the worldviews in the United States, is impacting our society more than the others. A reminder, this is a thing we saw earlier on. You got the secular or closed worldview, material universe only, humanity evolved, is solely a product of material forces. Truth is relative on moral issues. Existence is by accident. Humanity ends up being the authority. In the spiritual or open worldview, we'll sometimes refer to as biblical worldview, material and spiritual in the universe, humanity created in the image of God. Truth is revealed by God, creation by intelligent design. God is the authority. So we need to look back historically and kind of move forward. And so we'll just do some brief snippets of historical periods that move us into the idea of humanism and then on into secularism. So the philosophical environment in the first century There were skeptics. Skepticism was a part of some of the philosophical thinking of that time, but you really they don't exclude the gods and goddesses out of the picture totally. They may dismiss them as unimportant and you know and not involved in the world, but they don't seem to get rid of them totally. But they are very skeptic all about the spiritual realm in some respects, and so they focus more on the physical. You have people like Democritus, in pre-Socratic Greek father of materialism in Western philosophy. And there's no trace of belief in any afterlife in his work. He says those in Hades, he refers to constituents of the soul as atoms that dissolve upon death. And so he seems to be one of the closest you get to someone that uh, you know, spiritual realm isn't very important at all. Epicurus, see, he was a Greek philosopher who was influenced by Democritus. He too held to a materialist view and rejected any afterlife, while further, though, claiming that gods were also uninterested in human affairs. So he still gives thought that there are gods, but they're not interested in human affairs. And so you can see some of this in these two. On the other side, you have Stoics, Stoicism, which were not that skeptical of there being a greater being. Zeno of Citium was the founder of Stoicism. Um, God is a corporal entity, though not one made of everyday matter. So something different from the everyday matter. Epicureans thought the gods were too busy to be happy or be bothered while governing the universe. On the other hand, uh, Stoic God is immanent, in other words, highly involved throughout the whole of the creation and directs its development in every detail. And that would dovetail with Christian thinking. The entire universe is a living thing, and God is the life force behind it, enlivening it, moving it, and directing it by his presence throughout it. And so you can see quite different what Stoics' philosophical perception of the world was compared to the Epicureans. Uh, so Stoics' insistence that only bodies are capable of causing anything. This guarantees that this cosmic life force must be conceived of as somehow corporal, and a being, in other words. So interesting that you have these two views out there at the time of the beginning of Christianity. And in fact, Paul comes in contact with these guys. So you have this religious pluralism going on when Christianity came into the first century. Jesus, has his ministry, and then it's carried on by his apostles on through the first century and the second century and on. But in the midst of all that, Christianity comes in a very pluralistic world, just like we have a very pluralistic society today. Christians, when it first started, their pluralistic society was much more pluralistic than ours. They had all the gods and goddesses. You can think about Judaism. Was Christianity was a fulfillment of what was spoken in Judaism. From a Christian perspective, you probably find Jews would say no, that was not the case, but it was prophesied Messiah would come, and Christians see the Messiah as Christ and Jesus, and thus the connection with Judaism. But they were a small group within the world as a whole, the Western world as a whole. By far, you would have polytheistic religions all over the place, and various kinds and types from Greek, Roman to Persian. So all kinds of religions were available, and then of course you have Christianity, coming on the footsteps of Judaism, moving into this pluralistic society that was there, and they bring this message of Jesus as the Savior of the world, and so this teaching just radically changes the world within the first 300 years. By 350, it's said that over 50% of the Roman Empire professed to be Christians, and of course it becomes legalized, under Constantine. But yeah, from then on, Christianity spreads, and it probably mainly spread because it is a belief of hope, and also it gives structure to life and gives directions that help people. And it's an encouraging religion that tells us to get out and help one another, and so it began to spread all over the place. But when we think about the Christianity being in a pluralistic world, realize that the early Christians knew about this and had to interact with the different beliefs that were there. Examples of this we can see with Paul, who you call Paul Tarsus because it came from Tarsus. What a lot of people don't realize is that Tarsus was at the height of the uh, boy, I'm drawing a blank here, philosophical center of thinking during Paul's time. So he would have come in touch with all these different philosophies. And of course, everybody was familiar with the different pagan religions and polytheistic thinking of the time. So you have some things, you have some absolute quotes that Paul says. I'm quoting this from your own philosophers or poets. And so in 1 Corinthians 15:33, evil communications corrupt good manners. Well, Meander, a writer from the 3rd century BC, he's supposed to have quoted this from another scholar, Euripides. And so, was it a common saying or not? It doesn't say in the context there. But again, there are overlaps with some of the philosophical thinking as with Christian belief system. Titus 1:12, one of themselves, a prophet of their own. And so there you have Paul quoting one of their own. He says prophets here, but it's we would call it a philosopher. Epimenides is who he's quoting. He doesn't say the name, but he just calls him one of their prophets. Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons, and so and so he is actually quoting in this particular case. Acts 17 is a very interesting one. You have Acts 17, 18. Paul encounters the Epicureans and Stoics. We just talked about a little bit. Paul's first sentence, struck directly at the Epicureans, the origin of the world by mere coincidence and atoms. He took the side of the Stoics, and that who say divine wisdom and providence was creating and ruling all things, or that being, and so he's not saying something that's so radical from a Stoic's position, but just realize that he's communicating the gospel in the midst of all this, and his speech is somewhat made up of words that are quoted from the Roman Stoic philosopher called Lucius Annius Seneca. So there is overlap, but it's very easy to see some teachings of Stoicism and in Christianity, the overlap in some areas of moral obligations and understanding that the world has this superior being. Example is this Acts, again in Acts 17, Paul said, God made one of every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth. And this, if you look back at some of Seneca's writings, who was a Stoic, we are members of a vast body of nature made us kin when she produced us from the same things and to the same ends. And so some people see that, maybe, some of this is getting, similar to what Paul is saying. And so he and the Stoics have some things in common, or Christianity and Stoicism have some things in common. Paul said, God is not far from each and one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. Seneca wrote, God is at hand everywhere and to all men. And again, God is near thee. He is with thee. He is within thee. And so some similar areas there. And then in Acts 17:28, Paul says, for we are also his offspring. And so he quotes from one of their own poets, and in doing this, and that poet he's talking about is Aratus, and this is found. This quote is found in the Phenomena of Aratus, so you can actually look this up to this day. So realize that philosophy and religious thinking was all over the place at the time of beginning of Christianity, and the Christians were aware of it, and they knew they were bringing in new thoughts that hadn't entered into the society's thinking at that time. And so, but they were dealing with a very pluralistic situation, just like we are today, as we deal with things, different world religions, as well as different world views, like secular humanism. Another one, Acts 17:29, being then the offspring of God, we ought to not think the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone graven by art and devices of men. Seneca, Stoic philosopher, parallels similar thought. Thou shalt not form him of silver and gold. A true likeness of God cannot be molded of this material. So it's very interesting to see some of these things. It doesn't mean that Paul was dependent on it, but he no doubt saw ties to it, as he was a well-educated person and familiar with the philosophies of the time, besides coming from a background of a Pharisaic Jew. Galatians 5:23b, Paul says, against such there is no law. And in Romans 12:2-14b, Paul says, are a law, they are a law unto themselves. And one writer puts it that this is familiar wording, like from Aristotle, who says, of men eminent for wisdom and virtue. Against such there is no law, for they themselves are a law. Whether that actually is going back to something that, that Paul is actually pulling from Aristotle's teachings or not, it's hard to know. But it just shows that people, even philosophers, can view things from a perspective that might agree at times with Christianity or might not. It depends. And that will be the case as we go further into history, that you have what is the relationship between philosophy and Christianity. Some of the early fathers were very much, they say you can use philosophy to help explain Christianity. Others would try to stay away from it. And that started earlier on. All right, another one, Acts 17:24. Paul went on to say, God dwelleth not in the temples made with hands. Seneca, the most prominent contemporary representative of Stoicism, put it in this way: the whole world is the temple of the immortal gods, And temples are not to be built to God of stones piled on high. He must be consecrated in the heart of every man. Interesting to see that. Oops. And then Acts, last one, Acts 17:25, Paul said, neither is God served by men's hands, as though he needs anything, seeing he himself giveth all to all life and breath and all things. Seneca put the same truth in this form. God wants no ministers. How so? He himself ministers to the human race. Okay, so that's just kind of a look at that historical aspect of it. And so we are going to leave it at that right now. And this will be a good time to make keeping these videos a little bit shorter. So we're going to cut off part 1 here and pick up on the post-apostolic period later. And so I'll bid you good day, and we'll see you on the next video.